Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good Tavach, a good week. We're also coming from Yutes Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, right before Shabbos. This year, Friday, when we say Lashana Teva, Belimud Chassidus, Ubedarkei Chassidus, Tikaseva V'Sichosemu. And being that we are continuing our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya, which is the Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus, the written Torah of Chassidus that the Alter Rebbe wrote and composed, and essentially captures Chassidus Chabad. Yutes Kislev, of course, is the Geula of the Alter Rebbe, which actually happened 2 years after the first edition of Tanya, and yet we say Yutes Kislev is the Geula of and vindication of the Alter Rebbe's approach in bringing Chassidus into Chabad. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll continuing learning where we are in Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom, and it's also schus and the schus and the merit of Zevi Cheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz La'erich Yom V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. As I said, we will begin with the Yutes Kislev discussion a bit, and then move into Tanya so much and how they're bound to each other. So Yutes Kislev, 226 years ago, in the year Tov Kuf Nun Tes, which was equivalent to the year 1798, is when the Alter Rebbe was freed from prison after 53 days, I should say, that he was imprisoned. Some say it corresponds to the 53 days, to the 53 chapters of Tanya, Likutei Amorim, that he was imprisoned. And we know that the imprisonment wasn't just due to factors of the Alter Rebbe's Menagdim, those that opposed him, who informed on him, but it was due to a challenge in heaven itself of whether the Alter Rebbe was teaching Chassidus in the appropriate way. Because he was taking Primus HaTorah, which we call the Even Yokar, the most precious stone of God's Torah, which was always kept somewhat discreet. It was kept more concealed, only to Yechidus Gula, individuals. Like the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Ein Dersh Ma'aseh Merkava Ela B'Yachid. So, and here the Alter Rebbe was not just teaching it, but teaching it in Chabad, Seichel, Anushi, that a human being should understand, and a human being, even the animal soul, should understand. And that was a big thing. So there was a challenge. But the vindication came with Alter Rebbe's freedom and liberation, that is the right approach. So essentially, when we learn Tanya now, we learn Chassidus in general, and we understand that our very minds, human minds, and even our animal soul minds can understand, you're drawing a likus into that type of level, which was always not such an easy thing to do. Because you could say the nefesh halikis, the divine soul understands the divine. The animal soul, we have to subdue, we have to tame, we have to keep under control. But that the very animal soul that understands physical matter, the Alter Rebbe writes in certain Ma'amorim, and Chanukah Ma'amorim, that the animal soul is involved with its own self-interest. Its mind is all about me. How to be more of me, to get my pleasures met, to get to survival, covet, power, influence, yeshes. For that to be turned into oil, using the Alter Rebbe's mashal for Ner Hashem Nishmasan, to be turned into oil, fuel, that fuels Ner Mitzvah V'Torah, that's a chiddush. And the breakthrough came, Yutes Kislev, as the Rebbe Rashab says, the Ikar of Yefutz Menesecha Chutza came, Yutes Kislev. That's why it's called Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, because it became the opening, the beginning of a whole new way of manifesting Torah in this world. To put it in simple Batish terms, before Yutes Kislev, or before Chassidus in general, you can say that, of course, the Torah was given by Matan Torah, and the Bitla Hagzera, Torah was given to transform the physical world into a home for God. For us, we take the materials of this world and we sanctify them. And the same thing in our Avodah, we make a mishkan of our own selves through Torah mitzvahs and through Chol Masachel L'Shem Shemayim, Chol Derchecha De'eu, that all our actions and all our paths are infused with the godly approach, with the goal of transforming this world, Adira B'Tachtem, to make a home for the divine. But this itself can be done in several ways. You could do it in a way, Mamayla Lamata. You bring in so much light that automatically dispels the darkness. Mamata Lamayla is a very different approach. You're actually transforming the existence itself into something divine. So initially, if you think about it, throughout history, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, when they were in Gan Eden, they were given the opportunity that had they done what they had to do, that powerful light would have spread to the entire world, and we wouldn't have to travel all over the world to refine the sparks in the words of Kabbalah and Chassidus, Vedas HaBirudim. Would be, as the Alter Rebbe puts it, the Baal Geula, a great flame, a great torch that draws all the sparks to it. That's Mamayla Lamata. Mamat Lamayla is when you engage with the world. So after the Chet Eitzadas, Adam and Chava were expelled from Gan Eden. And now they're told to travel, and their children, and their grandchildren. And now you have to go find the sparks. And this too, many stages. In the beginning, it was just in that region. Then finally, Avraham Avinu goes to Eretz Yisrael. And that's where they do the Avodah. Then there's the Avodah in Mitzrayim. And then the Yidden come back to Eretz Yisrael, and they continue and ultimately build the first Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash. But they still didn't accomplish the job. It was still relatively Mamayla Lamata. Then came Mamata Lamayla, Mepnei Chateinu Galinim Artzeinu. So on one hand, it's due to our sins, due to our dissonance, due to our disconnect. So we were displaced. But then the Gemara says, Zdokos HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Yisrael Shapizun L'Bein Omes. God did a tzedakah for Yidden, that He spread them among the nations. What's the tzedakah? We just said Mipnei Chateinu, it's due to our sins. So Chassidus explains the tzedakah is that now we go and refine the sparks in each particular place. Whether the Jews traveled north or to Europe, or east to Bavel and to the eastern countries. And slowly the transmigration continued, all in order to come gather the sparks from the bottom up. That's the tzedakah. Shapizun L'Bein Umas. They're spread all over the nations to refine the nations of the world, to refine every aspect of existence. When we learn Torah, even in other languages, in English or other languages, we're refining that language of that nation. So as long as we go by halacha, whether it's the garments that we wear, or it's Ozel Lekat Holach Ben Musa, when you come to a city, you follow its customs. Again, only when it's halachically acceptable, you're actually refining those customs, you're refining that part of the world. Until we're zeichet to kibbutz galuyos, which means physically, of course, that all the Yidden will return to Eretz Yisrael, but also beruchni is that all the sparks will be gathered and then brought back and elevated. But now it's from the bottom up. Bottom up work is a lot harder than from the top down. And every stage in history that's the story. So when the Alter Rebbe was imprisoned, it was yet another slav, another stage in this process. And when he was released and redeemed and liberated, that's the vindication that now, yes, we're going into the world of the Nefesh Habamis and the Seichel of the Nefesh Habamis. And we're going into the way the world works, and we're refining it from within, not just from without. The very fact when the Jewish people started moving to this part of the world, when they say Chatzi Kadar Tachten, America, yet another stage in this Aveda. So these are stages of Aveda, and each stage required, so to speak, permission from above, because it's not an easy process. But once it breaks through, it gives us a whole new level of power. So today we live in a secular world. You could say the secular world is a threat, and the Alter Rebbe indeed opposed Napoleon winning the war, the Franco-Russia War in 1812, because he felt France would, yes, offer the Jewish people more freedom, but godlessness, materialism. which in some ways was worse than the oppression that they were suffering in Russia under Alexander, Tsar Alexander. It was physically harder, but spiritually they were more intact. And we see what happened. Assimilation that plagued the Jews came when we were freed, not when we were oppressed. Because freedom offers opportunities, but it's also challenges. So we learn in the Parsha as well. Esav said to Yaakov, "Come live side by side with me." When the end of Parsha Vayishlach, the end of the story, Parsha Vayishlach, and Yaakov says, "You go ahead. Visnala li'iti, ad asher avi eladeinu se'ira." We will go slowly. We're not ready yet. So was he saying to him a lie? Says Rashi, no. You go ahead, and then there'll be the day when we'll be lishpit al har Esav. All mishim letzion lishpit al har Esav v'haysel Hashem amlucha. The time will come, and the Rebbe cites this in the Sicha Vayeshev Tovshinun Beis, 33 years ago, this week. That the Alter Rebbe was opposed because we're not ready yet, but now we are ready after 7 generations to go into France, to go into that world, and transform the Marseille, which is the French anthem, into Haderes v'amuna l'chai elomim, Habina v'abrocha l'chai elomim, to transform. But that comes with a challenge. That's not an easy thing to do. So Yutas Kislev opened the door, and now we can do that. We can go and explain even to a person who may be externally secular and not yet appreciate what Yiddishkeit is, explain to him in a way that even his animal soul could understand the value of Elokus, of godliness, of Ruchnius. And indeed, that's the theme of Tanya, the battle between the animal soul and the divine soul. So Yutas Kislev opens up that door. And ultimately, it also opens up the doors. The Alter Rebbe writes in his letter to Rav Levi Yitzchak Barditchever and to Rav Baruch Mezhebuzher that also the nations of the world and the ministers all saw the Kiddush Hashem Yutas Kislev. They saw the wonders. And the Rebbe explains why is that relevant? Because the point of Chassidus is not just to transform the Jewish world, it's to transform the entire world. Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, when will he come? When will Mashiach come? Chutza literally means to the outskirts. Well, it will be, as the Rambam paskins, that the business of the entire world will be only to know God. How do you know God? You learn Primis HaTeira, Dasa L'Kei Avicha. That's where you learn about Deus Hashem. Mola Ha'orez Deus Hashem K'mayim L'Yam Achasim. Oz Epech El Amim Sofa Brura. Kula Avdu L'Shachem Echad. Mola Ha'orez Deus Hashem. The whole world. So ultimately, this is a day that opens up the possibilities of transforming the world, on its terms even, into a world that's a keli for Elokus. There's so much more that can be said. I just wanted to share one thought on Yutas Kislev, being that we're coming from that day, which of course leads us all to do our part in learning Chassidus, Limud Chassidus, Darkei Chassidus, the paths of Chassidus, and implementing it, each one in our lives, and with everyone we meet. So whatever you learn, you share with others. And that's a perfect segue to continue where we are now. And we're close to the end of chapter 23 in Tanya. With Alter Rebbe, in his classic, inimitable style, explains what Torah is, after explaining what mitzvahs are. That God gave us a gift. He didn't just tell us what He wants us to do. He gave us a sense of peace of His very kavyachal DNA. So it's not just you're fulfilling God's will, or even understanding the halachas that God sent us, but you're understanding God Himself. You're becoming a manifestation of godliness in this world. And not just a mamala kalalman, but seviv kalalman, like he explained. Because zerotzen Hashem. So when you're learning about the world, let's say lahavdil science, or about how to lahavdil halacha that deals with the world, you're dealing with the rules of existence. And how to align that to godliness in halacha. With science, it's how to understand what makes the dynamics of the world work, what makes it tick. When you're learning Torah, you're learning God, how God sees the world, His blueprint, how God looks at the universe, the purpose of the universe. So it brings you to a whole different level. You're manifesting a transcendent state of non-duality, a transcendent state of Anochi Hashem Elokecha v'Achdus Hashem. So we learn, remember, Anochi Hashem Elokecha is the root of all the positive mitzvahs. So the mitzvahs taka like Evarim the Malka, they are organs or limbs of the king. And therefore, they're like one with the king. And when we do mitzvahs, we become a Merkava vehicle. Well, with Torah, it's even deeper because, firstly, our entire being, our thought, speech, our higher garments, not just our action garment, Maisa, is immersed in this. And immersed in what? Not just in fulfilling the will of God, like he said, Vorin de Malka, but that God Himself is now present within you when you're learning Torah. And that, as he said, is higher. Loi oid, he said. It's higher than the Yichud Ein Sof Be'el Mesal Yenim, because you're actually learning the Ratzon Elyon, what God wants. You're learning God's way of thinking, so to speak, and God's will. Hu Atera Atzma, and all the Elam Mesal Yenim, they receive their energy from Chochmah, but it's in a relatively defined way according to their needs. Whereas Torah comes from Sevav Kalaman, which is higher than existence, and that's what manifests within us. And even though we don't feel it, he said, Afagav Deloi Chazi, but something, but it still manifests within us. That we experience it. And because of that, we're also able to experience it in a way that we can contain it. Okay. And that's where we stopped. So we'll continue from there. So he said, Ubzeh Yuvan. Once we understand that, what Torah does, so Torah, again, if you only have mitzvahs, you also connect. You also align existence to God, but you don't have that higher level of the divine that's beyond existence, which is what Torah is. And with this we'll understand the greatness of Torah's Tavi, Mikol HaMitzvahs, greater than all the other mitzvahs. Like we say, the Mishnah says, in Peah, right in the beginning, Talmud Torah Keneged Kula. And other references in different places in the same vein. Va'afila mitfila. And even more than davening. So let's break this down. More than mitzvahs, now we understand, because mitzvahs is Evarim de Malka, we said. So as great as they are, there's something about it. Like he said earlier, the words of the Alter Rebbe were very strong words, he said. So let's go back for a moment. Not just Evarim the Malka, it's the Melech himself. Mitzvahs. There are milas and mitzvahs as well, because they manifest in Gashmias, the action-based. But this milah is the milah of Torah over mitzvahs. But how about tefillah? Tefillah has something, even though it's a mitzvah, tefillah also has something that's unique. She yuchud el misal yenim, says the Alter Rebbe. Tefillah causes the el misal yenim to merge. When a person davens, they're connecting existence like a sulam mutzav arzo reisha megia shamayma, like a ladder that stands on the ground and reaches its top, reaches into heaven. What is that? It connects the physical world with the higher worlds. So it creates a yichud el misal yenim, like you said, yichud el misal yenim. So, based on what we learned, that even the Eil Misalyenim don't come to Torah, because there it's ultimately a diminished Eir, and you don't have the save of Kalaman that you have in Torah. So see now the emphasis in Yuchid Eil Misalyenim. Mashenk in Torah, as I said, is higher than that. Okay. Now with that, the Alter Rebbe varns one thing. In the next brackets, he says, if that's the case, so then why do we find that a person who's learning Torah has to be mafsik, has to stop to daven? Not someone who's Torah Menase. If Torah is higher than davening, then why is he mafsik? So this is what he answers. He says, "V'hod the misha ein Torah Menase tzarich lahafsik." So that poses a question. That he's talking about someone Torah Menase where his whole being is dedicated to learning. And Menase means his work. His very work is his Torah. So he doesn't have to be mafsik. We're not talking about krishma, but davening. But someone that's not in that level, he has to stop studying Torah. The Gemara says that in Shabbos Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 11 way. So this seems to suggest that tefillah is higher than Torah. So the Alter Rebbe answers, Hainu ma'achas the mafsik u'mevatel b'lav hochi. This is not because prayer is greater than Torah. It's because, being that he's not a Torah Menase, he's not learning all the time anyway. And he legitimately stops his studies. In any case, and he's devoid of learning Torah. So b'meila, that's why he's mafsik. So it's not because tefillah supersedes Torah. That's why taka someone who's Torah Menase is not mafsik, because Torah is taka higher than tefillah. So you could ask the question, why didn't he say the same thing about mitzvahs? That a person is supposed to stop learning Torah if it's a mitzvah she'ev shalasas ayidei acherim. If it's a mitzvah no one else can do, you have to do. You just stop Torah also. There, however, is because it says there clearly, because that's negated to the shlemus of your Torah. That's what it says in Hilchos Talmud Torah in a number of places. I know if he's not mevatel for mitzvahs, he's weakening his Talmud Torah. This is how the Rebbe explains it in a letter based on Hilchos Talmud Torah. But tefillah is a different story. Tefillah is not because it's weakening Torah. So you have to say it's because you're mavatal b'lav hachi, you're mafsik b'lav hachi. Okay. And now comes the conclusion of the Perek. The Alter Rebbe brings it into an action, a call to action, if you wish. B'zeh yuven lamaskil. B'zeh yuven hamaskil, I should say. Of how what we've just learned about Torah, mitzvahs as well, but Torah especially. How do we take that to heart? It says, and this is how the maskil will understand. B'zeh yuven hamaskil, the one who's a discerning, intelligent person, a wise person, will understand. Lahamshich alav yirag dele ba'oske b'Torah. To draw down upon himself, and make use and a sense of reverence, yirag dele, of great reverence, when one studies Torah. So this way you learn Torah, of course it's a gewaltige thing, Torah Hashem, you make a brichas HaTorah. But now that you understand when you're learning Torah, you're literally transforming yourself into a whole different entity, into a transcendent channel of the divine transcendence, beyond all of existence. So that it should draw to a person, Yirik Dela Ba'oski B'Torah. Kishi's Beinan, And how do you come to this? When a person contemplates how his soul, remember we took the soul, the divine soul, and his garments, like remember we said Torah also primarily engages the thought, a person's brain, mind, and his mouth, and his words. So when you contemplate how that they're literally and utterly merged in a total seamless oneness with the divine will, and with the blessed infinite light, which is literally revealed within them, within his soul and his garments. And taking it further, when you compare it to existence, all the worlds, now he's saying the upper and the lower, even the upper, are considered null and void in his presence. Koloch shiva mamish, uka'ayin ve'efes mamish, and are literally null and void. So koloch, so he says koloh is the word koloh, kiloi, as if they're nothing. But then he says further, ka'ayin ve'efes mamish, they're literally null and void, even a deeper level of bittul. To the extent that the divine will does not become substantially immersed in them, enclosed in them. It's merely like a makif, something that's just removed and above and like beyond. So as to give them their main life energy, like we said before. But what is manifest within them? Only a glimmer, only a reflection of that light actually becomes enclosed within them, integrated within them. That amount, the maximum that they can contain without becoming obliterated. So it's channeled on that level. Whereas Torah is the very manifestation of that higher state of reality. So all this is the contemplation of the maskil, of the wise one, to understand. And that should bring him to great reverence and great awe. So there's still a little more to speak about this. Mom is the end of the chapter, which we'll do in the next class. But you come away understanding and appreciating what Torah is. So when you learn Torah, you're actually being transported, or I could say better, channeling into existence, something completely beyond existence. And in a unified way. So we'll stop here. A good Tavoch, should be a good Gebench to Yar, a Gula Dik week, a Freilich and Chanukah week. And we'll continue our journey next Mitzvah Shabbos, Eastern Time, 10 p.m. TanyaApplied.com. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.